Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the amount of choices there are out there? Whether you're shopping for cereal or toilet paper, there are so many options it's hard to know what's best for you. When it comes to finding skincare products that actually work, it's even more overwhelming. Whenever I have an acne flare up, I go to the pharmacy to try to find something for my skin, and I end up leaving with nothing because there's just too many options. Finding skincare products that actually work for you is complicated, and that's why we are excited to partner with Apostrophe, the sponsor of this episode. Apostrophe is an online platform that connects you with an expert dermatology team to get customized acne treatment for your unique skin. Through Apostrophe, you can get access to oral and topical medications that use clinically proven ingredients to help clear acne. Simply fill out an online consultation about your skin goals and medical history, then snap a few selfies, and a board certified dermatologist will create your customized treatment plan. Apostrophe offers access to treatments for all types of acne, from hormonal acne to facial acne, and even back, chest, and butt acne. They treat breakouts from head to toe. My box arrived super quickly, and the best part was that it came with stickers to personalize my prescription bottles. We have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/WHOMST when you use our code WHOMST. That's WHOMST. That's a savings of $15. This code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/WHOMST and click begin visit, then use our code WHOMST, that's WHOMST at sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thank you, Apostrophe, for sponsoring this episode. Hey everyone! Before we begin today, we want to thank our newest patrons, Dominique and Emma. Welcome to the team. If you want to be like them and get access to bonus content like our notes and outtakes, head on over to patreon.com/pod and prejudice. And just a heads up, in our next episode, we're going to be talking about the Lizzie Bennett Diaries with a very special guest. So if you've never seen it or you just want a refresher, now would be the time to watch it. Just go to YouTube and search Lizzie Bennett Diaries. And now enjoy this week's episode covering Fire Island with our guests, Jen, Sarah, and Rachel from Cruising Podcast.
One thing I'm gonna do really quickly before we start up is just apologize to Graham. So, fun fact about this microphone, it's not our usual microphone. I meant to travel with our travel mic. I'm in Massachusetts right now, but I accidentally packed my boyfriend's mic, which is not as good.
No shade to Mike's Mike.
No shade to Mike's mic. No, no shade to Mike. Shade to Mike's mic.
Yes, her boyfriend's name is Mike. This is getting confusing.
Yeah, yeah, sorry. My boyfriend's name is Mike, but it's just, gonna be a little bit less high quality sound from me than usual. So, anyway, this is Becca.
This is Molly.
We are here to talk about Jane Austen.
We are here specifically to talk about the much requested Fire Island, which recently came out, written by and starring Joel Kim Booster and directed by Andrew Ahn. And we are joined today with the most guests that we've ever had on the show at once. We're joined with Rachel, Jen, and Sarah of Cruising Podcast. Welcome.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Well, we're so glad to have you guys here on the podcast. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about your podcast and what you guys do in the internet podcasting space?
Sure. Sarah, do you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll take it. So, Cruising is a narrative style documentary podcast series about the last 20 or so lesbian bars in the country. So, the three of us, me, Rachel, and Jen, almost a year ago now, road tripped to each of the last lesbian bars. And then each episode is like a mini documentary about one of our stops on the trip.
It's truly so cool. I can't recommend the podcast enough. I feel our listeners are heavily queer, so I think that all of you will really enjoy that podcast. And we thought it would be perfect to have them on for Fire Island because it is just gay Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, this is Pride and Prejudice that takes place within the queer community on summer vacation in Fire Island, which is a beautiful little island off the coast of Long Island, a different island. And it is just an incredibly fun time.
It is really, really good. Before we get started talking on that, we're going to ask our guests a couple of questions that we ask all of our guests, starting with what is your relationship to Jane Austen?
I think this is Jen. I think I'd like to go first because I think I have the smallest and least influential relationship, which is that I know Jane Austen and I know Jane Austen, wrote Pride and Prejudice. That's pretty much the extent of what I know.
Okay, I'm gonna challenge you to that, Jen, to see who really has the least connection to her. I've seen Pride and Prejudice, and that's where it ends for me. I've seen Fire Island. Yeah, so hopefully, Rachel, you can bring it home for us.
I'm by no means an expert on Jane Austen or Pride and Prejudice. I have read Pride and Prejudice in, I think, high school was probably the last time I read Pride and Prejudice. And I have also seen probably a couple of Pride and Prejudice film versions along with Fire Island.
Which is, I would say, one of the more accurate modern adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. So you guys have basically read the book at this point, right, Molly?
Yeah, I mean, it was fairly book accurate. We're going to talk about some differences later on, but for the most part, they hit all the main points. All the characters are spot on representations of who these people would be if they were gay men. So,
Our next question is, if you have a relationship to Jane Austen, what's your favorite Austen content? And you can say literally anything for this answer. And if you don't have an answer based on a lack of relationship to Jane Austen, that's fine.
Well, I mean, I can answer this. I think honestly, after seeing Fire Island is now my favorite Jane Austen content, if we're counting that.
yeah, absolutely.
But previously, as somewhat of a theater nerd, my favorite Austen adaptation, Bedlam Theater's adaptation of Sense and Sensibility.
Incredible choice.
Really, really good pick.
Kate Himmel, if you want to come on this podcast.
I've reached out.
Oh, she should do it. She's got to do it.
She should.
Which Austen character, to the best of your knowledge, is canonically the queerest? And again, caveated that this is a loose relationship to Jane Austen in general. I can answer this first because I think I have the most experience with Jane Austen from anybody on this
For
podcast.
sure. Yeah, that's the
And
point.
for our hardcore Austen lovers out there, I will caveat that my answer is very clearly defined within the confines of Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice, because obviously we're not spoiling Molly on anything. But I would say Charlotte Lucas.
Yeah.
Because that girl don't have a lot of love for men.
Yeah, honestly, a travesty that she wasn't adapted into this Fire Island story. I would also say Charlotte Lucas is the most canonically queer. I want to say Mary Bennett, but she is well, actually, I wouldn't say in the book she thirsts after Collins. I think that's something that the movie adaptations add in. So I would honestly either go with Charlotte Lucas or Mary Bennett. Shout out to one of our Instagram followers, Pat, who will consistently respond to this question saying Charlotte Lucas is ace, and I agree with that. And I think that Mary Bennett is gay. And that's my answer of that.
Yes, I think it's very fair to read Charlotte Lucas in the ace category as well. And I do think that Mary, I wanna coin this for future reference. Mary's thirst for Collins is Margaret Dashwood syndrome,
Yeah,
which is to say that
gave her a personality in the movie.
yeah, well, one adaptation did something that all the adaptations later did as well, which is give, in the case of Sense and Sensibility, Margaret Dashwood a personality, but in this case, give Mary Bennett a thirst for Mr. Collins, which, is what it is.
So I started thinking about this during Pride Month because that's when this movie was released. And so I wanted us, in celebration of Pride, even though it is now July, ask you all, what is your favorite piece of queer fictional content? And it doesn't have to be like all-time favorite. Like I would say that my most recent favorite would be Heartstopper probably, which if you haven't watched that, it's on Hulu and it is so freaking cute and heartwarming.
I think my current favorite is Hacks, the TV show.
That is a phenomenal
Yeah.
pick.
Sorry, Jen, if that was
I
your
know.
answer.
I'm like, shoot. Now what do I say? I think a close second would be Dickinson. I thought it was going to be really kitschy. It was just really well done, and it had some nice queer tension strewn throughout the series.
Okay, I'm gonna go. I feel like there's a better answer for this. This is so like basic, but I'm gonna say Euphoria. And then also maybe keep thinking about it. If I have a really good answer, I'll interject it at some point.
Totally. I think that we can all interject as needed. I'll interject. I just finished a book literally right before we sat down to record this called The Charm Offensive, and it was about what would happen on The Bachelor. I mean, not it was a fake show called Ever After. If the prince fell in love with his male producer, and just like what that storyline would be, and it was so heartwarming, and I cried. So I'm just recovering from that right now.
I'm gonna put out a TJ Klune reference that Molly recommended this book to me, and it stuck with me because it was so sweet. The House in the Cerulean Sea. It's a very sweet little found family love story with a lot of magical children and satanic worship. Well, not satanic worship, but satanic acceptance.
Yes, Satan is a character who is a sweet little boy. Anyway, should we talk about Fire Island?
Yes. Before we do that, I'm just going to put this out there. We did this last time. We started covering non-Jane Austen like exact content. Spoiler warning for anyone who hasn't seen Fire Island yet. If you're listening to this podcast, I assume you have seen it. And even if you haven't seen it, it's basically just Pride and Prejudice. So just putting it out there for those of you who were hoping to watch it and make decisions about how things were adapted for yourself first.
Yeah, I'm about to give a very detailed overview of the movie, which tells you everything that happens in it. So if you want to watch it first, go pause now, go watch, come back. So before I jump into this, anyone feel free to interrupt me at any time. I got a little bit overzealous with how many notes I took, and I tried to keep it brief, but it's not that brief. So here I go into a brief-ish synopsis of Fire Island. We start with our Bennett sisters, Noah, Howie, Luke, Keegan, and Max, who are Lizzie, Jane, Lydia, Kitty, and Mary, respectively, on their way to Fire Island for a week. When we get to the island, we meet Erin, who represents Mrs. Bennett and is played by the amazing Margaret Cho, who won a lot of money in a lawsuit against a chain restaurant and lets all of the sisters stay at her house for free every summer. Noah decides he's going to help hopeless romantic Howie get laid this week before Erin reveals that she's broke and has to sell the house, making this their last summer together. At the dance later that day, Howie meets Charlie, who obviously represents Bingley, and is instantly smitten. Meanwhile, Noah is not smitten with Charlie's friends, Will, who represents Darcy, and Cooper, who's kind of a Caroline, Catherine de Bourgh hybrid. At a party at Charlie's that night, Noah goes to the bathroom and overhears Will telling Charlie that Noah isn't hot enough to be that annoying, and that Fire Island is a playground for superficial, vapid morons. The next morning, Noah finds Howie never came home, so he goes back to Charlie's house to find him and ends up accidentally inviting the whole house over for a dinner party. Erin freaks out and sends them shopping, but since they're broke, Noah's denting cans in the back of the grocery store when this very hot man, Dex, who represents Wickham.
I want to take a pause here because
Yes.
I want to give a shout out to Joel Kim Booster here for accuracy to the text of Pride and Prejudice, which states that Wickham is obscenely hot. He walked on stage and I was like on screen and I was like, oh my God, hot Wickham. Like really, really hot Wickham.
Finally. Because he's like canonically never hot in the movies, and he needs to be.
In the books, they make a big deal about how hot this man is. And in every adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, the guy who plays Darcy is hotter than the guy who plays Wickham because they always cast like a heartthrob to play the leading man in the rom-com. But here, the actor who plays Will, who I know from How to Get Away from Murder.
How to Get Away with Murder?
How to Get Away with Murder.
How to Get Away from Murder. Goodbye. Run.
How to Get Away with Murder. He is very hot. But this is the first time I've seen a Wickham on screen where I've been like, yes, that is an absurdly hot man. Like, that is ridiculous how hot he is.
Dex is definitely hotter than Will, for sure.
Yes, I had to give props because to me, we'll get into this, but to me, it's clear that Joel Kim Booster knows Pride and Prejudice super well and caught a lot of the nuances of the story and put them in the movie. And I appreciated that like little nuance right there.
Yeah. Actually, in the moment right before this, one of those nuances came out to me, which was Erin being like, I can't believe you invited all these people over for dinner. We're broke. What are we going to do? And they were like, well, you love throwing dinner parties. It makes it really stressful to be friends with you, but we can cancel if you want." And she goes, "I would rather die." And it's so Mrs. Bennet. Iconic. So, anyway, when Noah is denting the cans and Dex comes back, he's like, "It's okay, I'm poor too, I get it." Then Dex latches on to their posse, and as they're walking home, they run into Charlie and Will. There's some obvious tension between Will and Dex, so Noah obviously invites Dex to dinner because why not? At dinner, Will and Noah talk about books and have a battle of wits, which makes Noah, quote, both mad and horny, which is also just the nuance of Pride and Prejudice in a snapshot.
It's the maddest, horniest of the books.
hmm Later in the kitchen, Dex tells Noah that Will hates him because he has an OnlyFans, and then he and Noah kiss. The next day on the beach, I wanted to note that Luke has Dex in sunscreen across his stomach, which is some nice foreshadowing.
Big, nice shout out to Matt Rogers from Les Culturistas, who plays Luke/Lydia in this. He does such a good job.
Yeah. The girls interrogate Howie at the beach about what happened with Charlie after dinner, and it turns out all they did was do a puzzle and kiss. That night at the underwear party, shit hits the fan, which is where I really started. I was like, I can't, my notes are going to be too long if I don't pare this down. So I tried my best. But Noah and Will have some sexual tension before they're broken up by Cooper, who tells Noah that Charlie only brought Will here to hook up with him and that Noah should back off. So then Noah goes to hook up with Dex, but accidentally gives Dex a nosebleed when he sees Will watching them. Will then tells Noah that Dex is not a good guy, but just as he's telling him this, they see Charlie across the room dancing with his ex, Reese. Cooper then reveals that they flew Reese out that morning. Howie declares that he doesn't need Charlie, and everyone decides to go to an after party, but they leave Noah behind. So, Will walks Noah halfway to the after party, but they get in a fight in the rain, and it's very dramatic. When Noah finds Howie, they also get in a fight because Noah doesn't actually know what's best for Howie. The next day, Howie and Luke are both missing, and Noah gets a letter from Will explaining that Dex did something bad to a friend of his. Charlie comes to talk to Howie and tells him that Reese has Lyme disease, and that's why he's back with him. We'll talk about how I feel about that plotline.
We'll get to this, but what the fuck was that plotline?
Yeah, that whole plotline was.
It was lazy.
That's what I think too.
We'll get to it, but this was the only place in the script where I was like, there was a much simpler way to deal with this whole adaptation piece. But
Yeah, agree. So Noah says something that Howie doesn't like, and so he like storms off, goes for a walk, and he runs into Will. They talk about everything and sort of become friends when Will does a dance battle, and it's very endearing. The next day, they go to the beach and read together. Then later at karaoke,
the dangers of a very long synopsis.
Later at karaoke, Howie sings a beautiful love song in front of Charlie, but as soon as it's over, Erin screams because she's been sent a sex tape of Luke and Dex. And Luke was on drugs and doesn't remember the tape being filmed, so Noah is like, "No way, I'm gonna kill him," and he goes to find Dex. He runs into Will, shows him the video, and Will also says he's gonna kill him, and they go off together. Noah pushes Dex into the pool, and Will uses legal jargon to scare him into deleting the video. Charlie then introduces Reese to Noah and Howie, and Reese is racist and awful, and we hate him. Then Howie decides to leave the next day, and he and Noah have a heart-to-heart about the Asian hate they face within the queer community and the different ways that they deal with it. Howie is already floating away on the boat by the time Charlie and Will get to the dock, and Noah tells Charlie that he has to do something big and stupid to fix this. So, of course, they steal a water taxi and follow Howie to the mainland. Charlie makes a beautiful apology, they kiss, and Howie comes back to the island. Later, Noah and Will talk about what they want in life and decide to live in the moment and not worry about the future, and then they kiss too, and everyone dances in the sunset. The end.
That was so impressive. Everyone give Molly a
Good
hand for that
job,
one.
Molly.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I love the karaoke beautiful love song, which is just a really slow version of a Britney Spears song that comes back to us in a different version again later in the movie.
The soundtrack of this is very on point all around. Great opening song as well. Everything about the music was on point.
Yes, I would agree. And also, I did not know Bowen Yang could sing until this movie.
Yeah, it was sweet.
All right, so should we dive into chatting about this? I guess one way to start would be to just open up and get people's first impressions of the movie in general.
I mean, my expectations were, what is this going? This could be, so many different things, and so it could be some terrible things. And probably like 15, 20 minutes in, I found myself just really I think that it was written really well. It was quick. It wasn't too kitschy. I think the humor was on point. Like I felt connected to it, even though it was a movie about gay men.
Yeah, I enjoyed it so much more than I was expecting. I think similarly, didn't have super high expectations of it. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm really the target audience for this movie about gay guys on Fire Island, but I had a blast. Like, it was genuinely very entertaining and fun to watch. And I thought it was smart and great performances all around. And yeah, I liked it a lot.
Okay, I think this is going to be an interesting conversation because I really didn't like it. Well, there were a couple things that I liked about it, which I'm excited to talk about. But yeah, in general, I just like I felt like it was like really like some of the humor was like so stereotypical and like kind of like predictable, and I just feel like a lot of the like characters and humor were predictable, and I don't know, I have like I have a list of complaints about it, but I don't have to like get into it right this second. But
I will say, don't be shy about them. Like when we
okay.
talk about our least favorite parts, like spew them out.
Okay, yeah. I just feel like in general, it's like kind of it's a similar thing to like Love, Simon, which is like, is there value in this representation, even if it's like not necessarily like groundbreaking content? Like, is it just groundbreaking on its own and like good on its own because it's like something new that like we haven't, like the queer community hasn't been able to have in media? But like in general, if it was the exact same thing and it was like not all gay people, I would like like I don't think we would like see as much value in it at all, because it's like not like a good, it's like a, okay, I'll get more specific later.
Very valid. And for the record, we always love when people have disagreements on our podcast when it comes to different content. We've had several different people on different episodes who either really, really, really love and are very invested in the things we're covering, or like really like viscerally hate them. So we've run the gambit on this. My personal experience was like really enjoying this one. Again, Molly and I come at it from having obsessively in detail reading Pride and Prejudice, and um, I really appreciated this as an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. I had a really good time watching it. I had a lot of fun. And I think for me, and we'll get into this, something that I was really impressed by, which I haven't seen done in many adaptations of Jane Austen's work, was the effort to bring Jane Austen's class commentary to the work, which is usually thrown to the wayside in Jane Austen adaptations in favor of the romance. And I think that seeing Joel Kim Booster try to take the biting satire of England's upper classes and apply it to the politics and class dynamics of the queer community in Fire Island and his own personal experience of it was a really interesting watching experience for me.
It seems like that's, we read a blurb. I was like, I need to refresh, like Pride and Prejudice, Rach, like help me out. And from what she read to me, it seemed more so about class than it did about romance. So I think it was represented really well in a certain type of community in the flick. But that was, I feel like that was a main vein to be communicated. So I'm surprised that other adaptations don't push that. I feel like it kind of like strings everything together for me.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes make sense with the Darcy Lizzie romance. It is completely centered around money and him being rich and snobby and like
The economics of dating in Jane Austen.
yeah, the economics of, I wrote that in my notes, the economics of dating in Jane Austen under similarities, because that's what they did it in a way that wasn't like, I feel like there's not, people aren't like necessarily thinking about money as much when they're dating nowadays, but I think that they did a really good job of translating the economics of dating in Jane Austen into other kinds of capital. When they're on the boat coming over and everyone just starts taking their shirts off, and Lizzie explains that like there's money, but there's also, do you have abs? Are you white? Like how their class system works on Fire Island and in the gay community.
The kind of class commentary and the whole economic side of all the relationships in the original Pride and Prejudice, like totally ups the stakes of the romance
Mhm.
in the novel. And like you said, like that doesn't happen, I don't think, in most adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. And I feel like Fire Island did a really great job of translating that to a contemporary audience in a way that makes sense with this setup of like, oh, this might be their last summer on the island unless they, and it's not heavy-handed, like this was kind of the unspoken, I feel like, subtext of the film, like this is going to be their last summer unless they make some connections, unless they start
Mhm.
dating, like, I don't know, there's just that dynamic of like class, like momentum
Yeah.
that raises the stakes in the novel.
And it wasn't in your face. Like I think it was dropped in subtle ways that it just kind of sat with you, like either subconsciously or in a different part of your brain while you were watching the movie, that made it more, like you said, raise the stakes.
I totally agree. That was one of the things that I wrote down that I did enjoy, was that like using that social class as the social class like conflict, I thought was really interesting and like really accurate. That is like, that's why you should make a movie about Fire Island, is to like explore that, which I think is cool. I do feel like, and then maybe the question for all of my critiques is like, is it trying to be what I want it to be? Like, is it trying to be realistic? Is it trying to be realism in any way? Because I thought I have beef with like how mean the people were and how like it seemed some of it was unrealistic to me, that they would walk up to a party and people would know that they were poor and annoying immediately.
Right.
That's like such a, first of all, such a cliche of like that being how you enter a party. Like that doesn't, everyone's in like bathing suits. Like, how do you know that these people are poor? I found that weird, but maybe that's not what they were going for. There were moments where I felt like they were kind of trying to have this realistic portrayal of people, but
My take on what was going on, and like, uh, again, I have not read enough interviews of Joel Kim Booster's sort of rating of the piece to know for sure. I think you are correct. There were definitely moments where I thought it was clumsy in its adaptation of trying to really press Pride and Prejudice onto the dynamics of Fire Island. But I do think it was sort of supposed to be a heightened satirical situation where everything was a little over the top, um, with the through line. And I really found this to be an interesting part of the story of Howie and Noah, or for our listeners going by the books, the relationship being Jane and Lizzie, their bond and their pain in the community being sort of the more real grounding thing in the movie.
Mhm.
Which brings us to a difference between the movie and the book, which is that this movie really rests on that relationship between Jane and Lizzie, or Noah and Howie, in this case played by Joel Kim Booster as the Lizzie character, and Bowen Yang as the Jane character, being sort of even more outside of the community, and being Asian American, as well as being, you know, not very wealthy, and in the case of Bowen Yang's character, or Jane's character, not feeling like he doesn't match the aesthetic that's expected in certain pieces of the gay community. So I think that the movie really like focused on their relationship above the romances in a lot of ways, which I thought was an interesting choice.
Yeah, the Noah saying that he wasn't gonna get laid until Howie got laid, like that centered their relationship immediately and made it less about like who they were getting laid with and more on the, oh, I'm gonna help you in this way, and then Howie being like, I don't actually need help in that way in the end.
but that was dumb though. Like, it's like he was spending just as much time with these other men, and he was just like, it was like almost religious. Like he was like, I just can't have like, he's like, I can't have sex yet for this until this like arbitrary thing happens.
Right,
Like,
and then he still does though. Like then he
right.
still goes into the
He
back
still
room.
does, and he still is like but it's just like you would think the point of that would be like, okay, you have to focus on Howie, but you're still just like going off and making out with them and what like it's like it was so unnecessary. Like I don't know. I think there's still conflict within the film without having this like weird boundary for him.
Why do you think they put that? Why do you think he put that in then? Because in theory, this is my best bud. I'm his wing person. That would be enough for me to be
Right,
like, I wouldn't
exactly.
have to be like, I'm not getting laid until you get laid.
No.
Like it could just be like, you're my dude and I'm focusing on you. Like, let's get you hooked up. Like, I wonder why it wasn't just simpler.
Yeah, I feel like it was honestly a writing mistake where they just put that line in because it's not something from the book and he doesn't fully adhere to it. And I feel like they lose it almost immediately, but then like later on he's like, my blue balls are eternal. And it's like, then go have sex with someone.
I mean, first of all, he did suck a dick in the
He fully
middle of
did.
the movie.
Yeah.
He did. I think it messed up my timeline for me a little bit too. Like I kind of because that was like a statement in my head. I was like, oh, how he's gonna bone or get boned, and then it's gonna be a lot of sex and like I thought it would be a little bit quicker on and like Howie hooking up so that Noah could hook up because it seemed like it was like a big deal for Noah to hook up. Yeah, it kind of like it messed with my movie timeline or my foreshadowing in my own head.
I think if I'm being generous in terms of the writing of this screenplay, it might be an attempt to up the ante of Howie or Jane getting laid in the first instance. Because, again, if you look at the Pride and Prejudice novel, Jane Bennet getting married is a huge deal because she is the oldest daughter in the family,
Oh.
and
Mhm,
she
mhm,
is
mhm.
the one most likely to snag a rich guy and secure the future of her entire family. So there's a lot of stakes in Jane getting married, whereas it's kind of hard to just be like, oh, he's my shy friend who's not got a six pack.
Right.
It's crucial that he gets laid.
You know what would have been really interesting is if they part of the like relationship between Howie and Charlie was exactly that, like trying to secure a way to still come to like somewhere to stay on Fire Island.
Oh, like an ulterior motive, not just like true romance.
Because that's so real. Like I know people that go there and they can't afford like to rent any place and they just go there and like meet people on Grinder, meet people and stay like couch surf or like stay with people that they're just like meeting and hooking up with. That's a part of the culture that would be so interesting and also like mirror the book more.
And I feel like
Would
that is what Charlie's friends are trying to like quote unquote protect him from.
Right.
That's like what they're suspicious of.
Yeah, they were like, if that really is what they were talking about, I like wish that they had said that. That was weird to me. Like, what do you think they're trying to get from you? Like, you would literally think he's a gold digger. Like, if so, they should have just explained that because that's interesting. Like that they need a place to stay on Fire Island, and that's maybe why they're talking to him or why they want the two of them to get together. But they like didn't really make that clear. I feel like.
what happens? What do the Howie and Charlie storylines like? What is the development of that storyline in? Go ahead, Molly's pumped to explain this to me.
Yeah, well, because this was the main thing that I think that they got wrong in this movie.
This was the biggest flaw in the movie, for sure.
It's glaring. So in the book, Bingley is smitten with Jane. Jane is smitten with Bingley, but she's shy, like Howie is in this, and doesn't fully show that she loves him. And Darcy, one, thinks that she's a gold digger. Two, thinks that her family is just completely lacks decorum and is embarrassing, and which they are, and they show that at the party with the cheese and the water and everything. And three, thinks that Jane doesn't love Bingley as much as Bingley loves Jane. This movie just completely gets that wrong, and Darcy then and in the book Darcy separates
Oh yeah,
them.
this is crucial is that Darcy is instrumental in separating the Howie character and Charlie.
Right. He tells Bingley that Jane doesn't love him and it moves him to London to be far away from her and like separate them.
Yeah, so the trajectory in the book is that these two meet, they fall kind of in love, and then Darcy separates them because he thinks that it's not a favorable connection and that she's not in love enough with his friend to be worthy, basically. And Lizzie has the best time ripping Darcy a new asshole about the whole endeavor. And basically, by the end of the book, Darcy has repented and he actually brings,
He grows.
yes, he grows,
Growth.
and he brings the two back together in the end and they end up married. But after they have to sort of reconcile the sort of abandonment moment that happened. And then Darcy basically apologizes and fixes it. And this, what made me angry is because I saw at the very beginning of the film, there was a way to adapt this cleanly. Because here it looked like the Cooper character, which is the Caroline character, Bingley's sister in the book, basically brings Bingley's ex there and has him hang out
Because of Lyme disease.
because of Lyme disease.
But that was fake. But either way, like, he was still dancing with his ex as if he was still with his ex.
So at the very beginning of the movie, Will says to Charles, "What are you doing with this guy? He's cute and everything, but you just got out of a serious relationship." So I thought Will was going to convince Charlie it's not a good idea to jump into something and he should be having random casual sex on the island.
Yeah, I thought Will was going to be more of a bad guy, so to speak.
Right.
That would have made sense.
Because that's what happens in the book. Darcy, the whole book is about Darcy fucking up in the beginning, one, saying mean things about Lizzie and her family, two, separating this relationship, and then later on saying, I'm sorry I insulted you and your family, but you have to see it from my perspective. But like again, I apologize and I love you. And two, I really did have my best friend's best interests at heart. I thought your friend wasn't in love with him and growing and then repenting and getting them back together. And in this, he never makes a mistake.
I think they could have went like Rebecca, you were saying, they could have went there, but they completely departed from that after the overheard conversation. I think they could have went down that road, but I think after that it just kind of disappeared.
Which would have frankly been, I feel like, a more interesting and maybe realistic plot line than the ex-boyfriend with Lyme disease.
The ex-boyfriend with Lyme disease of it all.
We just talked about Pride and Prejudice and zombies, and it's fresh in my mind because I just finished editing that episode. And our guest for that episode was talking about the best parts of the book and the movie being when it was closest to what Jane Austen wrote. And I think that she really knew what she was doing in terms of plot. And the ex-boyfriend with Lyme disease, she just wouldn't have written that.
But that being said, I do want to say, because we're on the topic of the quote Jane and Bingley, or the Howie and Charles, I just want to say I loved the guy they cast as Charlie.
So sweet.
I thought he was so cute and he was so earnest, and your heart just sang every time his little blue eyes got all sad. So he had like a tough plot line to work with, but I thought all the work he did in like the interim of that part was really, really nice.
Yes. I think while we're talking about differences from the plot line of Pride and Prejudice and things that we didn't think clicked, maybe we should just talk about our least favorite parts now while we're on the subject of talking about things we didn't like.
And then I promise we will get to, for those who enjoyed the movie a lot, we will get to talking about the things we liked a lot too.
Sarah, this is your cue.
Okay, well, we were talking about Charlie, and I just feel like this goes a little bit with like what I was saying about like not making it clear like what was such an issue with like the two groups being together. Like when Charlie's like, I've never met anyone like you guys before. I just thought that was crazy. Like, just so many things like that were like so dramatic. Like
A few times that was like driven home, that point of like, who are you alien people that I've like never encountered?
Right, like you've never met someone that's not rich ever. Like I feel like they overdid the like class structure, which is already there and already really interesting and already like more dramatic than it should be. And then they just kind of like took it and made people too mean and made people like I just like it didn't make sense to me. I didn't like the narration. I thought that was like really, I just feel like we're past that in movies at this point. Also, please interrupt me as well. I don't want this to just be my monologue. I didn't like how much Noah loves Fire Island and the way he was like at dinner when they all started crying about losing the house. I thought that was insane.
Yeah, these men just need to, like, rent an Airbnb somewhere a couple times a year. I
I
feel like
know,
it's so
yeah.
easy.
Like your New York City servers, like you can definitely afford. You're fine. Like
Right.
you're more poor than these other people, but you're fine.
Well, also, I will say about the class structure and the money, like, Will is a lawyer at a nonprofit.
That was the one that stuck out to me as an attorney. I was like, "Wait a minute. There is no class divide here. Who bought the mansion that Bingley or Charlie is living in? Is that his parents? Is he from money? Because if he's a doctor, if he's a pediatrician, he's not making Mansion on Fire Island money."
That much money, right?
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, also Charlie or not Charlie, Cooper, when he pulls Noah aside, he's, like, talking about Will, and he's like, he I think he comes from money, and it's like, do you not come from money? I mean, like, you're
You're a
all
brand manager. That's code for trust fund baby.
right, you simply must be, like, if you're making your money on Instagram, like, you're not making that much money, but
That also came out of the blue too. Like it was like Cooper was just a dick, period. So like Cooper could have just been a dick throughout the entire movie, and I didn't need to know that Will was flown in or brought to the island for to hook up with Cooper. Like I didn't need that to know that Cooper was just a dick and will be a dick for the whole movie.
well, that is a nod to the or to the book, because Caroline in the book, Bingley's sister, is thirsty for Darcy. However, I will say I didn't think it was obvious in the book. I didn't realize it until like halfway through.
I firmly disagree with Molly.
All right,
It's
okay.
very
All
obvious
right.
from chapter 3 onwards that Caroline really wants to bone Darcy.
Now it makes sense. Now that part of the now it all makes sense.
I will say I did not think that Will was actually flown in for Cooper's benefit in this. I thought that Cooper was being super self-involved and kind of a dick and had decided that Darcy was gonna be his LA boyfriend.
Ah, yes,
But
yes,
that
yes.
I thought Charlie had flown Will in because he didn't like the people who were staying in his mansion, and he actually wanted a real friend there.
Oh yeah, that's what he
Um,
said, right?
Yeah, I
yeah,
think he did say that. Yeah, yeah.
which again, and I do have to emphasize this, there is actually no class divide as far as I could tell because Will was a lawyer at a nonprofit and Noah was a nurse at a clinic, and neither one of those jobs makes a crazy amount of money, but they're at the same class level, pretty much.
Right, and Noah is just as hot, if not hotter than Will, so he has that on him
Mm-hmm.
too.
I think we just have to assume that there's generational wealth involved.
Yeah.
That's like the only way the movie works is if
Totally.
like even though Will and Noah are probably making the same annual salary, Will comes from wealth and Noah doesn't. It's like the only way to justify it, even
I
though they
will.
didn't explain that.
I agree with you that we if you like want to be able to take the movie seriously, you have to assume that. But I think that if they intended it that way, then they would have said something. I'm glad that they refer to to Will going all Elle Woods on what's his name, Dex, because that scene was like so obviously like it's like the exact scene from Legally Blonde, and it was like it was just like so dramatic. And if they hadn't said that, like I was about to be so mad, like that they had that as a plot. Like you can't just like steal that plot point that you like go and lawyer whatever. But I'm glad that that like kind of I forgave them for that a little bit because they like referred to it as him Elle Woodsing. And then, oh, I actually have a question. So, how many of you guys, and also if you know anything about your listener, like, have you guys been to Fire Island, and do you think that your listeners have been to Fire Island?
I did a poll on our Instagram yesterday about how many of our listeners are from New York, and it's a shockingly low number. So I feel like a lot of them probably haven't. Although I guess people travel, but I haven't. I wish I have.
I've been. I can't say I've been to like any big clubs on Fire Island, but I've been to Fire Island. It's beautiful.
Jen, have you been?
I've been to Fire Island a bunch and to Cherry Grove.
Okay, cool. That'll just affect the way that I the way that I talk about it, as if I'm the expert of Fire Island.
Well, I digress. I probably went in my late 20s and early 30s. I haven't been in, let's say, 7 to 10 years. So it could be very different from when I was going to Fire Island.
Mm-hmm.
Aging myself here.
I have not been to Fire Island, but maybe I'm making this up, but I feel like Fire Island has similar vibes to P Town. That's like how I envision Fire Island in my brain.
Same.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I think it's different. It's not, because it's not touristy. It's like,
Correct.
it's actually really like I totally get why you would think that, but it's actually, it's like it's just different. The vibes are just different. Both bad, I would say. Maybe worse than Fire Island. But anyway, that'll okay. I just wanted to know that before I start being like, at Fire Island, this is what it's like. But
please do. I want to know what it realistically is like in comparison.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those are like maybe some of the positive things. So I'll get to that. But I have like two kind of like big conversation starter issues with it, which is that the first thing is like, how much do we think this was like geared towards straight people, and like, are we okay with them like explaining things for straight people? Like, I thought it was kind of that it was really obvious to me when they were explaining the different party drugs that they were doing. Like, that just felt like a very like picture book of like, this is what like gay people do, you know what I mean? And there were a couple of moments like that, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not clear on whether I'm mad about it that we're like sort of, we have the like explanatory comma on so many things for straight people. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I always think when I consume queer content, particularly on like I feel like books for me, it's easier to like read books written by queer people for queer people and like enjoy that. When I'm watching TV shows, I'm always just a little bit skeptical. And same with movies. I fucking hated The Happiest Season, for example. So I was like skeptical going into this. I did worry that it was going to be geared towards straight people. I felt I could go either way because I felt like it was definitely like throwing stereotypes in my face a lot and like being very explanatory in that way, but I also there were the moments of found family and I felt like comfortable with the characters in a way, so I feel like I could go either way on how much it was for straight people versus queer people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think yeah, it's, I mean, you want it to be like consumable also. Like, I don't know. It's not like the worst thing.
Yeah, I think that was maybe one of my like biggest concerns, especially like going into watching the movie, was like, okay, is this going to be exploitive? Is this it? What's the target audience for this movie? Is it for straight people to like get a glimpse into what goes on Fire Island and like live vicariously through the crazy gays on your TV screen? And I feel like what makes it not entirely that, I think certainly there's a little bit of that, and that's just like Hollywood and capitalism and like what they needed to do to probably get this movie funded and greenlit, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it being an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice makes it feel somehow okay to me. Like, it's not just this portrayal of Fire Island for the straights to consume. It is like also an adaptation of this classic novel, and it's like, why shouldn't we get an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice that is just fun and queer and set on Fire Island? Like, that's such a fun setting for Pride and Prejudice to unfold.
I totally agree with that. I talk a lot about queering Austin on this podcast, and like 50% of why I wanted to do this podcast was because I felt, well, I mean, starting out, I had no idea anything about Jane Austen, but after having started to read her and like get more like engrossed in the classical literature fandom online, I think it's important for her works to be made queer because a lot of the people reading her works do see themselves in these stories. Like when we were talking in the beginning about which characters we think are canonically queerest, like I read Mary Bennett and I'm like, yeah, that was totally me when I was 16 or however old she is. Like, I think that it's important for those people to like get to see themselves in adaptations of Austen nowadays.
I think an inherent flaw of like setting it on Fire Island, while really interesting, is that it's like gonna be all based around men,
Mm.
which like I feel like, I guess, like, not that gay men necessarily need to like be thinking about, like, in all of their content, like be thinking about other people with other gender identities, but like it definitely could have been done. Like, I think they would have had to put in effort into like having a storyline like on Cherry Grove,
Mhm.
but like they could have done that, and I kind of felt like the Margaret Cho character was like their attempt at being like the movie isn't all men. But that is my like number one thing that I hated about the movie. Not necessarily that there weren't any women, but like the representation of women was like she existed like to take care of these men and to like give them a home and to like make dinner for them. And that was like her main character traits were like all around that. And then also like the cherry on top on the end, like the only other woman we see the entire movie is that lesbian that's like, when are we gonna get to Cherry Grove? Like that was so I can't believe that they kept that in the movie. Like it's so like I feel like there must have been smart people working on this that no, like let's not like have a stereotype, just have a lesbian screaming about Cherry Grove at the end.
You're actually tapping into an actual like public controversy that happened over the film. I read a couple reviews of the film after I watched it, just because I tend to try to like just get the cultural context of whatever we're watching. And there was actually a tweet from Hannah Rosen regarding the film and specifically its failure of the Bechdel test
Mm.
and its use of just one token lesbian character
Mhm.
in the film. And I should note that she did get quite a bit of backlash based on that tweet from the perspective of queer men of color who said basically the Bechdel test was created to critique machismo in film and whiteness, like the straight white man film that just excludes women and female characters altogether. And that I think I should just note, like, I'm a straight white woman talking about this, so I don't feel perfectly equipped to speak about it with all the nuance it deserves. But I think your critique is very valid with the caveat that there's also room for a story centered around AAPI queer men that we haven't necessarily gotten before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I just think that the way that it was done, the way that there's like one and then that extra lesbian woman, like the way that the woman in the movie was portrayed, like that wasn't necessary. Like everything else could have been the same. And like they did that. They had the whole like throwaway plot line of that she was kicked off of Cherry Grove because they wanted her to be on they didn't dive into that, like, that wasn't interesting, they didn't make it that funny, like, it was just because they wanted it all to take place on Fire Island, not on Cherry Grove, because otherwise it makes no sense. Why would a lesbian buy a house on Fire Island and not Cherry Grove, and just have gay male friends that she like invites there and not like I literally wrote before I knew that she had been kicked off of Cherry Grove. I was like, I have to believe that this woman has other friends that are just not there right now, and also that the house is on Cherry Grove and they're like not explaining that, but obviously it wasn't. One thing that like is at least like interesting to know about Fire Island is like the meat rack that they mentioned, which is like not entirely clear. It's like that is like to get from Fire Island to Cherry Grove, you have to like walk through these like dunes and like greenery and stuff, and it's like not a short walk. So anyway, I think that was like a part of it that they like wanted everything to be on Fire Island. But I just think they could have done Margaret Cho way better. She could have been a more interesting character and had her own like more of her own life like some of the other characters did, and I don't think that it had to take away from the stories that they did tell and, like, the representation that they did have of, like, queer men of color.
I will say this was, like, from a while back, but we were talking about, queering Austen, and I realized that the 2 gay Pride and Prejudices that we've covered have all been about men as the Bennet sisters, and I wanted to shout out a book that I read that is a lesbian retelling of Pride and Prejudice, where Darcy's a woman, and it's called Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellfleur, so it's a book, YA,
We love YA.
of course, but, everyone
Of course.
should check it out.
Cool.
All right. So I think it might be a good time to turn to things we enjoyed about the movie.
Totally.
Starting, I guess, with I said it already, but I really liked the guy who played Charlie. I thought he was really cute.
Yeah, he was very sweet.
And I feel like I will put this at the top as just a mention. This was like the hottest movie I've ever seen. Everyone was good looking in it.
Very.
Lots of chests, male chests, lots of chiseled muscles.
Mhm,
I thought you were
mhm.
gonna say butts. Lots of butts.
I actually was surprised. I thought there would be way more ass in this movie because it was about gay men, and there wasn't. I just thought there would be like assless bathing suits, or just more butt. I
There
think
were a couple.
yeah,
Yeah, there was one assless underwear.
yeah, but I thought there would be more.
I have to say, I mean, Sarah, I agree with, I think, some of what you're saying about how Margaret Cho's character could have had more of a backstory, more of a life of her own, been a little bit more developed without kind of taking away from the stories of the queer men of color in this film. And yet, I still feel like Margaret Cho stole the show. Maybe that's just because she was the only lesbian character and I am starved for lesbian representation in film and TV, but I just think she was so good and she had the best one-liners of anyone in the
She
whole
did have really
movie.
good one-liners.
Yeah, I think she really they obviously not to pull it all the way back to the novel again, but Mrs. Bennet is an iconic mom character and
Way over the top.
extraordinarily over the top as a character. And I thought Margaret Cho did a good job balancing the Mrs. Bennet of it all with giving it a little bit more heart than Mrs. Bennet sometimes has. Because sometimes she's just screeching really loudly through the entire
Yeah, but she
movie.
cares about her girls and she, like, ultimately wants what's best for them and wants to marry them off. One of her lines that I really loved was when she was like, "Our Howie with a doctor, it'll almost be like having health insurance again." That was
Uh
so
huh.
Mrs.
Uh huh.
Bennet.
I love how she just exclaims when they're walking behind them on the dock, and he's like, "I'm a doctor," and just like perfect comedic timing. She's like, "Oh," and like covers her mouth. It's like in my head, I'm like, how many times did they do that? Because they nailed the timing.
Perfect.
Yeah. And it was
Absolutely.
cool to see this like chosen family that is so integral to like queer culture as like the Bennett family led by Margaret Cho, the matriarch, even if some of her character traits were maybe a little like gender stereotypical.
Mhm.
Yeah. I love that idea. It's similar to, like, the way that they represented social classes, like, taking this family and making it a chosen family, I think is really interesting for sure.
At heart, I am a very big sap, so I lean in really, really hard to the romantic, even if it's like really just over the top and cheesy. I enjoy that, and I thought this made my romantic heart very happy throughout.
Yeah, I want to shout out Joel Kim Booster and the guy who played Will as well, because I actually thought they had some great chemistry. Sometimes there's a little bit of a switched flip when it comes to when Darcy goes from sort of hating Lizzie to loving Lizzie. But what I thought was one of my favorite moments of the entire adaptation was the Alice Munro conversation they had outside the house and the back and forth and the witty banter about the literature. Because first of all, it's a Jane Austen adaptation, so repartee is very important and literature is very important. But I thought the actor who played Will did a good job of using that scene to transition from thinking this guy is vapid and shallow to thinking, oh, he's got substance and he's challenging and interesting to talk to, which is the Darcy and Lizzie of it all. So that was my favorite scene, possibly that one and the scene where Howie and Noah are in the bathroom together and Howie's all upset and we didn't talk about this, but the rice queen, quote unquote, the creepy guy who keeps trying to hit on Howie and Noah. That's definitely a comp to Mr. Collins in Pride and
Absolutely.
Prejudice.
Yeah.
But the scene where Howie is like upset and he basically says like, "Stop trying to compare my experience to your experience. Our experiences are different, and you know it." I thought that was really powerful, and again, I think anchored the whole movie in their relationship as opposed to their romances.
It's a sister's tale.
It's a sister's tale. It's by the sea.
And it's by the sea. A few more things about the guy who plays Will, Conrad Ricamora. I will first say that he's currently playing Seymour in Little Shop, I think off Broadway. But I watched his Tiny Desk performance yesterday after watching this, and it was just so sweet. And he's so awkward, and he wears these little glasses, and just like also extremely handsome. He had a few of my favorite moments as well. One being the repeated moment of him just like throwing his ice cream cone to the side.
Yes, hilarious. That was so funny.
I loved that. He's like, it's melting.
He just throws it to the side. They were like, "Oh, Will, I didn't think of you as a tiny ice cream cone kind of dude." And he just like throws it down. And then later on, when Noah sees him and he throws it and just starts running away. It's perfection, perfect comedic timing. Also, the moment where Noah comes to find Howie the next morning after the party, and they have like an interaction in the kitchen, and Noah is like, "You don't actually need to pollute the oceans with your water bottles. The tap water is fine." And so Will throws his bottle in the garbage. But then as soon as Noah walks away, he like, you see that he's like not actually a tough guy, and he takes it out of the garbage and puts it in the recycling. I thought that that was a really great nod to Darcy's kind of softer side, and like his tough exterior actually being a softie. It was really sweet to
And
me.
a full-blown human disaster,
Oh,
canonically.
absolutely a full, but like he doesn't know what to do in front of a hot man in this. He's like, I'm gonna. Loved that. I also want to shout the sunset, which was probably the most iconic moment in the movie for me, when they're all on the dock and counting down the sunset, but they have to keep extending it, and they're like point 0.9, point 0.7, point 0.6, and I just counted wrong, but that's okay. Nobody has to know that. And then afterwards, when Keegan, who for me was my favorite, Keegan and Max were my favorite out of the Bennett sisters. When Keegan is like, "You go, girl. You said, proud of you, girl. See you tomorrow." I was like, yes. So good.
I loved Keegan. Keegan was for sure my favorite character. Also on the dock when they were like, I also have a list of funny, like there were some funny lines, but like when they were like, he was like, "Do you want to go to their hot tub?" And then they were all like, "Hot tub, hot tub," and they were like, "Shh," and the people are right there. So good.
And they're like, be chill, be chill.
He's like, "Yeah, I guess, we think we could probably make it."
That shot of all of them kind of silhouetted on the dock, like you saw both groups, and then on the right hand side you see them all being like hot tub, and you can just see how close they are still standing together.
Yeah.
It's like such a smart shot. Like
Yeah.
that was definitely a top moment of mine.
I thought that the water bottle moment was weird. Like, I get what they were going for, but it was so dramatic. And it was almost like it was like foreshadowing. I mean, I guess it was
Oh, it was
foreshadowing that he's like a
100%
good
foreshadowing.
person, but that's so weird. And also, there was still water in the water bottle, so he
I
was
know,
like
it was
not
dumb.
even doing a good job. So it's like this quiet zoom in of like him putting a water bottle into the recycling thing. It was so weird. And I thought that his vibes were really weird in the beginning too, when like they were trying to have him be like kind of aloof and off-putting, and I think that that's because they didn't fully explain why he was skeptical of the other people. Like it just seemed like he was like he was just like being a dick. Like it was so weird. Like he was just like, "Hi."
And it was sloppy too, because then the next day he's like, "Listen, I wanted to apologize for last night." Like all of a sudden he's in love with Noah. He's like so being so sweet to him all of a sudden, and Noah's like, "You want to apologize for Brayden?" And Darcy's like, or Will is like, "Yes." And then like they get mad at each other. But like, what was he apologizing for? Like, when did he change his mind about Noah? That didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, that was it was a weird transition from enemies to friends. So that was like strangely portrayed to me.
And also kind of helpful though to keep the movie like not 2.5 hours. I think there were like these like just stepping stones that were much bigger than others, but and unseen, that just happened to like get us to the end.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another favorite moment of mine was Max. So again, Keegan and Max are my two favorite of the five of them. And when Max gets high and he's in the party and someone says, "Who is that?" And then he looks in the mirror and he goes, "Who is that? Is that me? I'm gorgeous," and starts crying. I lost it. I thought that moment stole the show for me. His whole performance in that scene.
Max was the most relatable character in the entire
So
movie.
relatable when he was like, "I don't think I wanna be implicated in this," when they're stealing the boat at the end, like, I get it. Yeah, and he was like, "I am fun and smart and worthy." When he was high, I was just like, you are all of those things." It was
I
great.
was a little bit worried at first though, because then when we realized like he was on drugs, and then he looked in the mirror, in my head I was like, never look in the mirror. Like, you never look in the mirror when you're on drugs. Like, get away from it. But it turned into an endearing moment, not a scary one.
Yeah.
Yes. I also want to shout out another scene that I loved, which was Darcy dancing. I
Mm.
thought that was so weird and so fun and so
It
funny.
was weird?
Also, a little cameo from Peppermint in that scene.
And
Just
Peppermint
like
was so good.
she was just thriving up there.
Yeah, she was so natural. I was like, I was all in on Peppermint. That was awesome.
Her reaction to the way he spoke was the most organic moment in the entire movie. where
Totally,
I've been to
yeah.
a drag show before where like the drag queen gets someone on stage who's like, hi, and they're like, okay.
Yeah, totally, totally. And then she was like reacting to people like shouting things in the crowd, and she was like, "Oh, like it was so real." Anyway, yeah, she was a star for sure.
Yeah, she looked absolutely gorgeous. And Bowen singing a song to Charlie. Oh, I wanted to say, I think on the Charlie front, I think what they were going for with how into the group he was that like sometimes people who are like born into wealth in a certain way and follow like a very specific path through a professional school don't really get the experience of like coming down to earth and creating found families and learning about themselves in a like stupid 20 something kind of way. And I thought what would they were going for with Charlie like being in sort of enamored with their group a little was that like longing for that freedom and that warmth and that community
Real
that he
friends,
wasn't
maybe?
getting.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and I say this as someone who's like, I've been in the messy 20 something world, and I've also been in the world of like professional attorneys and their general like tunnel vision on like their achievements in certain ways. It can lead to a really lonely life. And I think they were going for the sort of like loneliness of Charlie. And I thought for me, another really powerful moment was when Noah confronts Charlie and basically says, "You know what? How am I the only person who's ever even asked if Howie, you are good enough for Howie?" And then he looks like he's going to cry because he like feels it in his own soul. I thought that was a good moment as well, despite the fact that the ex boyfriend with Lyme disease was there.
I feel like the game scene where they're all playing Heads Up, also an amazing scene.
That was
Like,
Mhm.
so
So
good.
good.
Yeah.
that was so funny. But I think that scene kind of like drives that point home that like it's not just that there's this like class difference and he's never met like poor people before. He's like never met people that have like fun and do
Right.
family game night and like are silly, which is also like exemplified by Will just like not knowing what to do.
Tomei
Oh my gosh, one of my favorite line deliveries was, "Laura Dern, we get it, you're gay."
Their Marissa Tomei impersonations were on point, and
So good.
I could rewatch that like 2.5 minute clip once a day.
I kid you not, the night before we watched this, like, or 2 nights before we watched this, we watched My Cousin Vinny, and my boyfriend had never seen it before, and then we went straight from watching My Cousin Vinny to this, and we did not know Marissa Tomei would feature so heavily in Fire Island.
That's amazing.
The defense is wrong.
The defense, and they did it like 6 times
Some
to
of
see
the
like
defense is wrong.
they were almost like competing while simultaneously saying it. I thought it was so fantastic. And then they split, and one went one direction, one went "Imagine You're a Deer." Like it was done really well. It was very funny.
I think that this could be a good transition into our favorite line deliveries. We've already done some of them, but I mean, I wrote down like 6. So I can start with one of them. It was Luke, and he says, "I don't know why you guys don't think of me as more of a threat." I thought that was great and also encapsulates Lydia
As a
really
character,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wanna shout out a really, really, really clever line snuck in, and it is a quote. And the reason it is clever is very Jane Austen-y, but, at a certain point in time, when they're getting ready to go to the underwear party, um, Noah's on the floor doing sit-ups and shitting on Darcy, and Howie just turns around and goes, "Ugh, way harsh, Ty." That is a quote from Clueless,
Oh yeah.
which is a contemporary adaptation of Emma, a book by Jane Austen.
Whoa!
And this is a Jane Austen adaptation as well. So I thought it was really fun to pop a little homage to one of the most iconic Jane Austen adaptations into this film in like a cute little like under the radar way because they reference like dozens of rom-coms through the movie. But just this one little reference to Clueless, I was like, "Oh, Joel Kim Booster, you know you're Jane Austen."
Okay, as I said, I have some funny lines written down I can read. So I don't remember who said this, but someone was saying like he thinks Lindsey Graham is starred in The Parent Trap, and then like at the end of the scene, someone's like Lindsey Graham in The Parent Trap. I would watch that, and like honestly, like yeah, just like the mental image that creates is so funny.
So funny.
Then maybe my favorite line in the whole movie was, "Do you know who Amy Schumer is?"
That was my second favorite line.
I wrote that down too.
And then Keegan, my favorite, was like when they're like they don't know where Howie is. They're like, he's like, "I swear if something happened to him, we were making a podcast."
I know.
That's like so good. And then this is Margaret Cho. She's like referencing Will, and she goes, Charlie's friend, what's his name? Like we?
She's like, "Woo?"
Oh yeah, Woo? Woo? And they're like, Will. So good.
I wrote down a lot of Margaret Cho's lines, but
Mhm.
I really liked her "Girls, I have some terrible news. We're broke." Which I don't know if that is a moment that happens in Pride and Prejudice, like the "Girls, I have some terrible news," but it just felt very like Jane Austen and
It's
like
pretty Sense and Sensibility, actually.
yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But it just felt like "Girls, I have some terrible news. Like one of you must be married off like
Mhm.
in this week." Like I don't know, that just like set the vibe for me. And then a personal fave of mine was I was an early investor in Quibi.
Yes.
That was hilarious.
Well, you guys pretty much took all of mine. So I will go to my favorite nonverbal line, which is I'm pretty sure at the end of the movie when Will and Noah were kissing to Last Dance, they kissed on beat. I could have just been like wanting that to happen because it was so romantic. But if you rewatch it, I'm pretty sure they're kissing to the beat of music.
I'll look out for that next time. I have a few more favorite line deliveries, so I'll keep going. When Noah drops his phone, or rather, when Max bumps into Noah saying, "Ah, there's a tick," and Noah drops his phone in the pool. Luke asks Noah if he has Apple Care, and Noah says, "What about me having an iPhone 6 Plus in 2022 makes you think I can afford Apple Care?" But also Luke saying, or no, maybe it was Keegan saying, like, "Well, my dad says that if you don't have Apple Care, you only have yourself to blame."
It's Luke. It's Luke says it. Yes,
Luke.
it's funny.
I think another Luke line was my roommate who I watched this with said that it was improvised, which was, "Can someone trade a Crest White Strip for a prep pill?" It happens off screen, so I'm not sure who says it, but apparently it was not scripted. And then my other ones I've already said, which were "Proud of you, girl. You set. See you tomorrow, girl." At the sun, and then Max looking in the mirror and saying, "I'm gorgeous." So those are all of mine.
Incredible stuff.
So if we don't have any more favorite line deliveries, we like to end our episodes by asking who wins the movie. It can be anyone. It can be an actor, it can be a character, it can be a moment, it can be the cinematography, the music, the director, pretty much anything.
I'm gonna say Keegan.
Me too.
I just think he did so much with that character, and it was also like I don't know, it was like so much in a way that was very real to me. Like I know, I just like I'm thinking of one person in particular, but like I just know people like that, and it was also so funny. Like I've got to give it to Keegan.
I completely agree. Keegan, for me, every time I've watched this, has been a standout performance and just like so honestly true to character. Like Kid and gave Kitty, who's kind of a nothing character in the book, more to do while still being Luke's slash Lydia's right hand man slash sister. He was so good. And Max, who was phenomenal, like reading a book on the way over and just everything about him. Just those two were standouts to me.
I was gonna put Keegan and Max were up there for sure, but I think also I'm gonna give it to Bowen Yang for his performance of Howie as well because I really feel like he put a lot of heart into that performance and really like had for me the moments in the movie that like grounded me, brought me back to earth, and also made me like really feel for him. So good on him because I mean, I think Bowen Yang is generally hilarious, but I think he had a lot of straight man, so to speak, role pieces of this movie, not in terms of heterosexuality, in terms of comedy.
Sure.
But I thought he actually performed them with a lot of heart. So yeah.
I think I have to say that this might be a cop out answer, but the casting overall one for me, particularly in regards to the film's like treatment of race. I feel like it just should be said that like at least most of the adaptations of like classic literature or pieces of media that are set in the like Jane Austen time period are just completely like colorblind casting, and it's like, oh, this is an alternate universe in which race does not exist as
Mhm.
a thing, and that just was not the case at all with this film. And I think they just did a really beautiful job of addressing race and through color conscious casting
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
And
piece.
making it a relevant plot point.
I was gonna say some specific writing to really make race a part of the story.
Mhm. For me, it was Keegan and Will. Keegan because he just totally fabulous and beautiful, acting. And Will because I feel like I kind of, as much as a lesbian could, I kind of like was smitten with him. I went through a character development in my appreciation and love for him in the flick. And he just, I don't know. At the end, I was kind of like, I really like him a lot.
Yeah.
He was pretty dreamy, and they had some real chemistry.
Totally.
And he was sweet. He had his sweet moments where I was like, "Oh, he's just a disaster." But like, yeah, I wish that he had been more developed. And I think that Conrad Ricamora did a really good job with the character.
Totally. Agreed.
All right, that concludes this episode's discussion of Fire Island. Thank you so much, the cruising podcast in general. Do you want to tell the people where they can find you?
You can find our podcast at cruisingpod.com and at cruisingpod on social media. And the podcast is streaming wherever you get your podcasts. So you should follow Cruising Podcast and listen. Yeah, those are all the big ones.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for coming.
Thanks for having us. This was a blast.
Thank you so much for having us. This was so much fun.
Yay! So until next time, stay proper.
And and go watch a sunset. Pod and Prejudice is edited by Molly Burdick and audio produced by Graham Cook. Our show art is designed by Torrance Brown. Our show is transcribed by SpeechDocs Podcast Transcription. For transcripts and to learn more about our team, check out our website at podandprejudice.com. To keep up with the show, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pod and Prejudice. If you love what you hear, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice to see how you can support us, or just drop us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.